40 acres and a mule is often remembered as a promise the United States never kept. But that familiar version leaves out something crucial. In the final months of the Civil War, a federal order actually reserved Southern land for black settlement. Tens of thousands of freed people began farming under that policy. Then the government reversed course and returned most of the land to former owners, including people who had enslaved them. This was more than a promise that faded away. It was a limited policy that began, created real expectations, and was deliberately rolled back. The story starts in November 1861, when United States naval forces captured Port Royal Sound near Beaufort, South Carolina. Confederate forces and nearly all the area's white planters fled. Thousands of enslaved people remained. In the Port Royal experiment, freed people pursued paid labor, education, military service, and land ownership. Beginning in 1863, some bought property at federal tax auctions. Those buyers received legal titles, an important distinction later. By early 1865, the Army faced a refugee crisis as freedom seekers entered Union lines. But freed people were not waiting for officials to define freedom. On January 12th, General William Tecumseh Sherman and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton met in Savannah, Georgia, with 20 black ministers and lay church leaders. The group chose Baptist minister Garrison Frazier as its spokesman. Asked what freedom meant, Frazier described it as being placed where black people could reap the fruit of our own labor. Asked how they could best support themselves, he answered, "Land." 4 days later, Sherman issued Special Field Orders No. 15. The order reserved islands south of Charleston, abandoned riverside rice fields up to 30 miles inland, and land bordering Florida's St. Johns River. It allowed each family no more than 40 acres of tillable ground. This was not a nationwide program, and the written order did not promise every formerly enslaved person 40 acres. It also did not grant permanent deeds. Settlers received possessory claims under military protection, while Congress decided what would happen to the titles. Nor did the order itself mention mules. In a related measure, Sherman allowed some settlers to borrow army mules. That helped produce the phrase, later remembered as 40 acres and a mule. The order's immediate purpose was military, to address the large number of freed people following Sherman's army. But for the families settling the land, its meaning reached far beyond wartime logistics. Land could mean control over where a family lived, what it grew, and whom it worked for. It could support communities outside a former enslaver's control. Sherman appointed General Rufus Saxton to supervise the settlements. The order left local affairs largely to freed people under military oversight. Across the region, settlers divided fields and built community institutions. Congress created another possible route in March 1865 through the Freedmen's Bureau. Its law authorized assignments of certain abandoned or federally acquired lands in plots of no more than 40 acres. Eligible occupants could rent for 3 years and might later buy whatever title the United States could convey. By September 1865, Saxton reported that about 40,000 freed people had been settled on 40-acre tracts. Then federal policy changed. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in April. President Andrew Johnson, a white Southerner who had remained loyal to the Union, held deeply racist beliefs. On May 29th, he announced a broad program of conditional amnesty. 14 classes of former Confederates were excluded, but they could apply for individual pardons. For those who qualified, a pardon could restore property rights, except ownership of enslaved people, and property already subject to federal confiscation proceedings. That created a direct collision. The government had settled freed families on land left behind by Confederate owners. Johnson's policy now opened a path for pardoned owners to reclaim it. On September 12th, Freedmen's Bureau Commissioner Oliver Otis Howard issued Circular Number 15, with Johnson's approval. It narrowly defined confiscated land and allowed pardoned claimants who proved their ownership to recover property when the United States lacked legal title. Crops already being cultivated were protected until harvest, unless the growers received fair compensation. The legal language sounded technical. Its human effect was sweeping. Saxton protested that the government had pledged its faith to the settlers. Freedpeople protested too. On Edisto Island, South Carolina, Howard met several hundred freedpeople in October and tried to persuade them to surrender the land. Their committee answered in writing. The petitioners said the government had encouraged them to take up land. They reported that freedpeople had occupied 16,000 acres on Edisto. They asked for homesteads and the right to buy them, and they rejected an arrangement that would make them dependent again on the people who had enslaved them. Their argument exposed the reversal plainly. Former Confederates could recover plantations after receiving presidential pardons. Loyal freedpeople, whose labor had built those plantations, were told to negotiate with the returning owners for work. The outcome was not identical everywhere. Some federal officers delayed restoration or negotiated temporary agreements. Around Beaufort, some black families kept land purchased at the earlier federal tax auctions because they held legal deeds, not the more vulnerable possessory claims issued under Sherman's order. But most property in the Sherman Reserve returned to pre-war owners. One National Park Service account estimates that by 1867, only about 75,000 of roughly 400,000 affected coastal acres remained outside restored pre-war ownership. The restoration did not single-handedly create the post-war labor system. War damage, lack of credit, planter resistance, racist laws, and violence also shaped what followed. But taking away land sharply weakened freedpeople's bargaining power and helped channel many families into wage labor, tenancy, and sharecropping. Those systems were not slavery. They could allow families some independence. Yet exploitative credit, debt, crop liens, unequal courts, and violence often restricted that freedom. Congress fought Johnson over Reconstruction. It strengthened the Freedmen's Bureau and enacted civil rights protections over his opposition. The 14th and 15th Amendments transformed citizenship and voting rights. But Congress never established a broad, lasting redistribution of former Confederate plantations to freed people. Black Americans still acquired land through purchase, homesteading, and collective effort. Black farmland ownership eventually reached millions of acres. But owning land can provide a home, income, collateral, political influence, and an inheritance. When the federal government restored the old planter land base, it denied many freed families a powerful foundation for economic independence. 40 acres and a mule compresses several policies into one phrase. There was no universal promise of a permanent farm and a mule for every formerly enslaved family. There was something more specific and fully documented. Black leaders said freedom required land. The United States tested that idea through wartime settlement, possessory claims, a bureau land provision, and related mule loans. Tens of thousands began building lives on reserved land. Then the government placed the property claims of pardoned Confederates above the expectations of those families. 40 acres was not simply forgotten. For many freed people, it was placed within reach, and then taken back. If you value overlooked history like this, please like this video and subscribe for more.